There's a moment blink and you'll miss it where the mask slips. It doesn't happen during a screaming match. It doesn't happen during a divorce announcement. It happens casually, almost lazily, when a man who has lost control tries to explain why everyone else is the problem. And that's when Kody Brown says it. Shy and pretty. Not once. Not accidentally. Repeated, polished, deployed like a badge of honor. And in that moment, the entire sister-wife story stops being complicated and starts being painfully clear. Because those two words weren't a compliment. They were a confession. And once you hear them correctly, you can't unhear what they reveal about power, punishment, and why this family didn't fall apart. It was dismantled. Kody Brown loves being the victim. He performs it. He narrates it. He feeds on it. According to him, everyone is always so mean, so unfair, so disloyal, so brutal. His wives didn't leave because he failed them. They left because they were cruel. They didn't disagree because they had valid concerns. They disagreed because they were attacking him. And now, after the exits, after the damage, after the unraveling, he has a new explanation neatly packaged into words. Shy and pretty.
He always wants to act like he's such a victim or that everybody's so mean to him or whatever. And he has this shy, pretty wife now, and she's really shy.
The only wife or the only pretty wife? Like, is he slamming all of us?
And then none of us were shy. So I guess that's his type. Submissive, shy, and pretty.
His current wife is shy and pretty, and the implication is sharp enough to cut if you weren't shy. If you weren't quiet, if you weren't agreeable, then you were never really right for him. And the internet heard it immediately. You could see it ripple across social media in real time. Clips reposted, captions sharpened, comments flooding in. Did he just insult all of them? Is he serious? So confidence is the problem now. TikTok stitched it. Twitter dissected it. Reddit tore it apart because women recognized it instantly. That language, that tone, that reframing. The moment where a man rebrands control as preference and submission as virtue. And before we go any further, hi, welcome back. Because if you're here, you already felt it too. Kody doesn't mean shy. He means compliant. He means obedient. He means unthreatening. When he says pretty, he's not talking about beauty, he's talking about presentation, pleasant, polished, non-confrontational, a woman who won't challenge his authority, won't question his narrative, won't disrupt the story he tells himself about who he is. And when he repeats it, he's not just praising Robyn, he's punishing the women who stopped playing along. Here's what makes this dangerous. He says it like it's harmless, like it's taste. Like it's chemistry, but context matters. He says it after multiple wives leave. He says it after years of conflict. He says it while we're writing history. That's not coincidence, that's consolidation. Because once you label one woman as ideal, you automatically frame the others as defective, too loud, too opinionated, too independent, too much. And that's where Janelle and Meri come back into the picture, not as villains, not as rivals, but as women trying to do something painfully undramatic, finish a land deal. Coyote Pass wasn't about feelings. It was about money, ownership, closure. Janelle tried to mediate. She relayed conversations because Kody refused to communicate directly with Meri. Meri was confused, frustrated, asking a very simple question. Why won't he just talk to me? And instead of answering that, Kody did what he always does. He flipped the script. Suddenly, cooperation became a conspiracy. Suddenly, communication became betrayal. Suddenly, there was talk of backdoor deals and secret agendas that somehow no one mentioned on camera until the very last minute, right before the property closed. And notice how that works. Accusations appear only when control is slipping. Rules are invented when outcomes are unavoidable. The NDA becomes a weapon after the decision is already made. That's not protection, that's narrative management. And in the middle of that chaos, during one of those tense conversations, the shy and pretty comment resurfaces. Not aimed directly at Robyn, but aimed through her. A comparison, a reminder, a warning. Because Robyn's role in this family was never accidental. Janelle clocked it immediately when Robyn joined. the praise, the validation, the way she spoke about Kody like he was a hero in a story only she believed in. While the other wives were exhausted decades deep, done pretending Robyn was new, attentive, affirming she didn't challenge him. She reinforced him. She learned very quickly what behavior was rewarded. This is where people get uncomfortable because they confuse submission with weakness. But submission can be strategic.
Robyn is submissive.
I do, and I feel like that works for Kody. That's what he wants. Follow the rules, do what I say, don't get out of line. And I'm sure that there's times where she pushes back. He wants submissive. He wants somebody who's just going to like kowtow.
It can be performative. It can be accuracy. Robyn didn't shrink, she adapted. She played the damsel. She let Kody rescue. She let him lead, decide, and dominate. And in return, she received stability, protection, and priority. That's not accidental. That's differential submission, giving up visible power to gain invisible control. You see it in the way she praises him publicly. You see it in how she speaks for him, refrains his mistakes, softens his cruelty. You see it in moments that should have been about accountability, but somehow became about his feelings. And you see it most clearly when she rewards behavior that should be challenged. During his so-called apology tour, when he demanded silence instead of dialogue, when he wanted to speak without interruption, when he didn't want to hear about the kids, Robyn didn't push back. She applauded. She called it growth. She called it accountability. And the audience collectively blinked and said, "Are we watching the same thing?" Because accountability requires listening. It requires discomfort. It requires humility. And Kody wanted none of that. He wanted obedience. He wanted admiration. He wanted the honeymoon phase to last forever. And Robyn was willing to keep performing it. Meanwhile, the other women who had lived real lives, raised children, built households weren't interested in worship anymore. They wanted partnership. And that was unforgivable. So when Kody accuses Janelle and Meri of girl games, what he's really doing is dismissing dissent. He's reducing valid reactions to petty behavior. He's reframing criticism as cruelty. And Robyn, intentionally or not, becomes the shield, the victim, the sensitive one who needs protection, which keeps Kody in rescuer mode, the role he loves most. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. The conversation between Janelle and Meri was never about Robyn. It was about Kody, about how he uses comparison as control, about how he weaponizes praise, about how he elevates one woman to punish others. When they joked, when they reacted, it wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. They saw the pattern. And once you see it, you can't pretend it's harmless anymore. Social media didn't miss this. Comments flooded in pointing out the hypocrisy. So being quiet equals being loved. So women with opinions are the problem. Imagine telling on yourself like this. And that's exactly what happened. Kody told himself. He revealed what he values and what he resents. He revealed that love, in his world, is conditional. You are cherished as long as you comply. You are discarded when you resist. And this is where the tension tightens, because this isn't just about one family or one man. It's about a system that rewards silence and punishes self-respect. A system where women are expected to compete for approval while pretending it's harmony. Where loyalty is measured by obedience. Where independence is framed as betrayal. And Robyn's continued presence, her willingness to stay, to encourage the lifestyle, to keep the structure intact isn't proof of strength. It's proof of alignment. Because staying is a choice. Encouraging polygamy is a choice. Centering your entire existence around one man's approval is a choice. And Kody rewards that choice lavishly. Attention, praise, priority, protection. While the women who chose differently are labeled bitter, brutal, and disloyal. But here's the line he crossed. The one he can't walk back, by calling Robyn shy and pretty. He didn't just elevate her, he erased the others. He reduced decades of marriage, motherhood, sacrifice, and endurance to a personality flaw. Too loud, too strong, too real. And the audience felt it. Because women everywhere have heard that before. The moment they stopped being convenient, they stopped being valued. And that's where this story actually begins, not with divorce papers, not with land disputes, not with tell-alls, but with two words that exposed everything underneath. Shy, pretty, say them slowly. Listen to what they exclude. Listen to what they reward. And ask yourself why a man who claims to want a family can only tolerate women who never challenge him. There's a reason that phrase didn't land softly. There's a reason it didn't just float by as another awkward Kodyism. Because shy and pretty didn't just describe a preference, it exposed a system. And once that system is visible, every past interaction starts to rearrange itself in your mind, like pieces clicking into place in a puzzle you didn't realize you were solving the entire time. Because here's the thing, Kody never wants to admit he doesn't want relationships. He wants hierarchy. He wants to be at the top, unquestioned, affirmed, indulged. And the moment his wives stopped orbiting around his ego, the moment they started operating as full people with opinions, boundaries, and expectations, the system stopped working for him. That's when the labels started. That's when difficult, disloyal, and eventually brutal entered the vocabulary. Brutal because they had opinions. Brutal because they didn't clap when he spoke. Brutal because they weren't shy. And this is where Robyn's role becomes impossible to ignore, because Robyn didn't just fit into the system, she optimized it. From the very beginning, Robyn understood something the other wives had learned too late. Kody responds to reflection, not reality. He wants to see himself mirrored back as strong, wise, desirable, important. He doesn't want corrections. He doesn't want accountability. He wants reassurance. Constant, uninterrupted reassurance. So Robyn gave it to him. She praised him publicly. She defended him reflexively. She reframed his cruelty as a misunderstanding, his neglect as stress, his abandonment as leadership struggles. And every time she did that, she reinforced his authority, not by challenging it, but by validating it. And that's why people misunderstand the word submissive in this context. Because submission here doesn't look like silence. It looks like an agreement. It looks like emotional labor. It looks like stepping in to soften his image while letting him believe it was his idea all along. It's not passive. It's an active alignment. Janelle saw this early. She said it plainly. Robyn layered praise onto Kody, dripped it on him, treated him like a godly leader at a time when the other women were tired, worn down, decades deep into a marriage where admiration had been replaced by reality. They weren't starstruck anymore. They were partners, or at least they were trying to be. But partnership requires equality, and equality threatens hierarchy. So when Robyn entered the family and immediately centered Kody as the hero of the story, it felt intoxicating to him. Here was someone who didn't challenge him, didn't question his decisions, didn't bring up old wounds or unresolved issues. Here was someone who made him feel powerful again. And power is addictive. That's why the damsel in distress narrative worked so well. Robyn positioned herself as someone who needed him, needed his protection. I needed his guidance, needed his leadership. And in return, he got to play savior. He got to feel indispensable. He got to feel superior. And once a man tastes that kind of validation, he will protect it at all costs, including at the expense of his other wives. This dynamic didn't just play out privately, it was on display for years. In how Robyn spoke for Kody during group conversations, in how she interrupted when others criticized him, in how she reframed situations where he looked selfish or dismissive. Even in small moments, like gifts he didn't like, Robyn rushed in to explain his disappointment, to justify it, to show that she knew him better. That wasn't a coincidence. That was positioning. And the most disturbing example of this positioning came in the form of that infamous purity speech, a moment that made many viewers physically uncomfortable. Not because of its content alone, but because of its intent. That speech wasn't about morality. It wasn't about religion. It was about loyalty, about obedience, about publicly performing remorse for a past that predated Kody, all to reassure him that he was the rightful owner of something that was never his to claim. That wasn't vulnerability. That was a submission theater. It was a display designed to reinforce Kody's authority over her narrative, her body, her past. And he ate it up. because it told him exactly what he wanted to hear, that he was special, chosen, central, that even her history revolved around him. Meanwhile, the other wives were aging out of fantasy and into reality. They were raising kids, managing households, dealing with neglect. They weren't interested in worship anymore. They wanted fairness. They wanted effort. They wanted consistency. And Kody resented them for it. Which brings us back to Coyote Pass, because that land deal is where everything collided. On the surface, it looked like a simple property negotiation, but underneath, it was a power struggle. Janelle tried to mediate. Meri tried to communicate. They were doing logistical labor that Kody refused to do himself. And instead of appreciating that, he reframed it as manipulation. Why? Because cooperation without his control threatens his authority. He couldn't stand the idea of Janelle and Meri working together independently of him. He couldn't stand that decisions were being discussed without his approval. So suddenly, there were accusations. Suddenly, there were secret agendas. Suddenly, there were rules no one had heard of before. And conveniently, those accusations surfaced only when the deal was about to close. That timing matters, because when people are losing control, they create chaos. They accuse. They distract. They rewrite. And that's exactly what Kody did, with Robyn positioned as the emotional justification for his outrage. Her feelings, her interpretations, her nuance. She reads nuance, he said. But what nuance? Exactly. The nuance that always aligns with his interests. The nuance that always paints him as the victim and others as aggressors. That's not intuition. That's confirmation bias wrapped in loyalty. And this is where the girl game's accusation becomes particularly revealing. Because calling something a game minimizes it. It dismisses it. It infantilizes it. It turns valid criticism into petty behavior. And when Kody accused Janelle and Meri of playing girl games, what he was really saying was, you are not allowed to respond to me. You are not allowed to joke. You are not allowed to vent. You are not allowed to name what I'm doing. Because if you do, you are attacking me. And by extension, Robyn. And Robyn never corrected him. She never said, they're allowed to feel hurt. She never said, maybe you should talk to them directly. She never said, maybe this is on you, because she knows the rules. And she knows the consequences of breaking them. This became painfully obvious during the apology tour. That surreal stretch of episodes where Kody demanded forgiveness without accountability. He didn't want dialogue. He wanted submission. He wanted his wives to sit, listen, and absorb his grievances without responding. He didn't want to hear about the kids. He didn't want interruptions. He didn't want to be challenged. And Robyn praised him for it. She called it growth. She called it responsibility. She called it leadership. And viewers watched in disbelief because nothing about that behavior resembled accountability. It resembled control. And this is the moment where everything turns, because it becomes clear that the collapse of this family wasn't about jealousy or personality clashes or even polygamy itself. It was about compliance, about who was willing to submit and who wasn't. Janelle wasn't. Meri eventually wasn't. Christine absolutely wasn't. And Robyn was. That's why she stayed. That's why she thrived. That's why she remains the shy and pretty wife, not because she lacks strength, but because she channels it in a way that serves Kody's ego. She aligns herself with his authority rather than challenging it. And in a system built on hierarchy, that makes her indispensable. But here's the part Kody doesn't seem to grasp. Submission only works as long as everyone else is forced to watch it. The moment the other women leave, the dynamic loses its power. There's no one left to compare. No one left to punish. No one left to prove superiority over. And that's why his bitterness has intensified. That's why the language has sharpened. That's why shy and pretty became a rallying cry rather than a quiet preference. Because without the others, the illusion starts to crack. And the audience can feel it. You can see it in the comments. You can hear it in reaction videos. People aren't just criticizing anymore. They're diagnosing. They're naming patterns. They're calling out dynamics that have existed for years but were easy to ignore when the family was intact. And now that it's not, the truth is louder than ever. Because what kind of man demands loyalty but won't offer respect? What kind of leader punishes independence? What kind of love requires silence? Those questions don't go away. They linger, they sharpen, and they point directly at what comes next. The part of this story that makes Shy and Pretty look like the surface of something much darker. And if you're still watching, you already know we're only halfway in. There's a moment when control stops working quietly and starts working violently, not with fists, not with shouting, but with language. That's when words stop describing reality and start enforcing it. And by the time Kody Brown reached for phrases like loyalty, respect, obedience, and Shy and Pretty, he wasn't talking about love anymore. He was issuing terms. Because love doesn't require silence. Authority does. Once you understand that, the entire emotional architecture of this family collapses into focus. Kody didn't lose his wives because he failed to communicate. He lost them because he refused to renegotiate power. And when women stop accepting unequal power, systems that rely on it don't gently adjust, they retaliate. That retaliation didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, first as disappointment, then as resentment, then rewriting history. Suddenly, the years of neglect weren't neglect, they were justified responses to disobedience. Suddenly, his emotional withdrawal wasn't abandonment, it was discipline. Suddenly, love became something women had to earn back by proving they were worthy again. And that's where Robyn's continued loyalty became essential to his self-image. Because without at least one woman still agreeing with him, the entire narrative would fall apart. If all of them left, then the problem would undeniably be him. But if one stayed, one defended him, praised him, aligned with him, then he could frame the others as defective, as incapable of appreciating him, as too damaged, too angry, too independent to be loved properly. That's why Robyn isn't just a wife in this story. She's evidence. Evidence that he uses to justify his own behavior. See, the logic goes, I can be loved. I am lovable. The problem isn't me, it's them. And that's an intoxicating delusion. But here's where it gets darker. Robyn doesn't just passively benefit from this narrative. She helps maintain it. Whether consciously or not, she reinforces the idea that compliance equals virtue, that staying equals moral superiority, that endurance no matter the cost is proof of goodness. This framing quietly shamans the women who left. It implies weakness where there was strength, failure where there was survival. And Kody leans into that implication every chance he gets. You can hear it when he talks about Christine. The bitterness, the disbelief, the rage that she would dare choose happiness without his permission. You can hear it when he talks about Janelle, confused, offended, unable to understand how loyalty didn't outweigh self-respect. And you can hear it most painfully when he talks about Meri, the wife he emotionally abandoned long before she ever physically left. Meri stayed longer than anyone else. She endured isolation, public humiliation, emotional neglect. And still, when she finally stopped performing devotion, she was treated as the problem. Because in Kody's world, suffering is only noble if it serves him. And Robyn knows this. She's watched it play out. She's benefited from it. She's stayed aligned with the man who rewards her for doing so. And that alignment gives her a unique position, one that looks like safety but comes with strings. Because as long as she remains shy and pretty, she is protected. The moment she stops, the system that devoured the other women will turn on her too. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Submission doesn't guarantee safety. It only delays consequences. Because systems built on hierarchy don't stop demanding. They escalate. What starts as agreement becomes expectation. What starts as loyalty becomes obligation. And eventually, even the most compliant partner is expected to sacrifice more. We've already seen hints of this. Robyn absorbing blame. Robyn crying on cue. Robyn taking on the emotional labor of smoothing over Kody's outbursts. Robyn defending decisions that isolate her own children from their siblings. Robyn carrying the weight of a man who refuses to repair what he's broken. and the audience notices. Social media notices everything. The comments under clips of Robyn crying aren't sympathetic anymore, they're skeptical. People are asking hard questions. Why does she always speak for him? Why does she frame herself as confused when the pattern is clear? Why does she insist she wants plural marriage while benefiting from monogamy? Those questions aren't cruelty, they're accountability. And they expose the uncomfortable truth. Robyn's role only works as long as she remains the exception. The good wife, the loyal wife, the shy and pretty wife. But exceptions don't last forever. Eventually, there's no one left to compare her to. And without comparison, superiority loses its meaning. That's why the collapse of the family didn't bring Kody peace, it brought him rage. Because he lost his audience. He lost the contrast that made him feel powerful. He lost the structure that allowed him to pit women against each other while pretending it was harmony. And now all that's left is a man and a woman alone inside a system that was never designed for equality. Which brings us back to the land, back to money, back to assets. Because emotional control often masks financial control. And when women leave, the first thing men like Kody cling to isn't love, it's ownership. Coyote Pass wasn't just property. It was leverage. It was unfinished business. It was a way to maintain influence over women who were trying to move on. And when Janelle and Meri tried to resolve it cleanly, Kody resisted, not because it was complicated, but because it symbolized finality. Closure terrifies people who rely on chaos. So he stalled. He accused. He created confusion. And Robyn once again became the emotional justification. Her concerns, her fears, her interpretations, always aligned, always validating, always shielding him from having to confront his own behavior. But the audience wasn't fooled, because by this point, the pattern was undeniable. Every conflict ended the same way. Kody positioned as victim, Robyn positioned as defender, other women positioned as aggressors, over and over again. And eventually, even the most loyal viewers started asking the question Kody never wanted asked. If everyone else is the problem, what's the common denominator? That question hangs heavy over this entire story. It lingers in every episode, every interview, every bitter monologue about loyalty and respect. Because once it's asked, it can't be unasked. And it leads directly to the final realization, the one that changes how you see everything that came before. The realization that this was never about love at all. It was about control. It was about obedience. It was about who was willing to shrink so one man could feel tall. And when women stopped shrinking, the system collapsed. What remains now is reckoning. And the last part of this story is where the illusion finally breaks, not just for the audience, but for Kody himself. Because when there's no one left to blame, no one left to punish, no one left to compare, all that's left is the truth. And it's louder than ever. There's a specific moment when denial stops being believable and starts becoming performance. Not because the person lying knows they're lying, but because everyone watching can see the effort it takes to keep the lie alive. That's where Kody Brown is now. Not confused, not misunderstood, exhausted. Exhausted from holding together a version of himself that no longer matches reality. Because the truth has weight. And for years, he kept dodging it by shifting blame, reframing history, and hiding behind the one person still willing to reflect his preferred image back at him. But here's the thing about reflection. It only works if you never look too closely. Kody's language gives him away. Every time he talks about loyalty, it's reactive. Every time he talks about respect, it's conditional. And every time he talks about love, it's always attached to compliance. Love is no longer a bond, it's a reward. Respect isn't mutual, it's hierarchical. Loyalty isn't shared, it's demanded. That's not partnership, that's governance. And governance collapses when the governed opt out. Christine opting out shattered the fantasy first. Not because she was the most submissive or the most compliant, but because she was the most emotionally expressive. When she left, she didn't just remove herself from the marriage, she removed the illusion that staying miserable was noble. She showed the audience that leaving didn't equal failure. It equaled relief. That was dangerous. Because once one woman leaves and thrives, the system is exposed. Suddenly, endurance doesn't look virtuous anymore. Suddenly, suffering doesn't look holy. Suddenly, all those years of sticking it out start to feel like wasted time instead of moral superiority. And Kody felt that shift immediately. You could see it in his face, hear it in his voice. The rage wasn't about heartbreak, it was about loss of control, loss of narrative, loss of the authority to define what leaving meant. So he redefined it himself. Christine didn't leave because she was unhappy. She left because she was disloyal. She wasn't brave, she was selfish. She wasn't choosing peace, she was betraying the family. That reframing wasn't accidental. It was necessary. Because if Christine left for valid reasons, then the entire structure was unjust. And if the structure was unjust, then Kody wasn't a victim. He was the architect. That's why Robyn's continued presence became even more important after Christine left. Robyn wasn't just staying, she was proof that staying was still possible. That endurance was still the right choice. That loyalty still mattered. But the audience saw something else. They saw imbalance. They saw a woman absorbing emotional fallout that wasn't hers. They saw her taking on the role of interpreter, translator, buffer, defender. They saw her constantly explaining Kody to other people, reframing his behavior as misunderstood intentions, asking for grace he never extended to anyone else. And slowly, the sympathy began to drain. Because defending harm doesn't make you harmless. This is where the conversation shifts uncomfortably. Because Robyn is not a cartoon villain. She's not evil. She's strategic. She understands the rules of the system she's in and plays them well. But playing the system still means sustaining it. And sustaining a system built on imbalance always costs someone else. That cost was paid by the other wives. Paid in years of emotional labor. Paid in silence. Paid in eroded self-worth. Paid in children watching their mothers shrink to keep the peace. And when those women finally stopped paying, the system demanded a new price. That price is isolation. Because now, Kody doesn't have a family. He has a closed loop. A relationship that mirrors back only what he wants to hear. And while that might feel safe in the short term, it's suffocating long term. Growth requires friction. Accountability requires dissent. Love requires vulnerability. None of those survive inside a hierarchy. And you can see the consequences setting in. The bitterness, the fixation on grievances, the inability to move forward. Kody isn't healing, he's calcifying. Every perceived slight hardens him further. Every boundary set by his former wives feels like a personal attack. Because in his mind, boundaries are insubordination. And Robyn, whether she intends to or not, continues to validate that belief by affirming his pain without challenging his role in causing it. By praising accountability that never actually occurs. By framing his behavior as misunderstood instead of harmful. That's not partnership. That's reinforcement. And reinforcement doesn't allow reckoning. Which is why the most haunting part of this story isn't the shouting matches or the insults or the dramatic exits. It's the quiet moments. The moments where Kody speaks about his children with distance. The moments where Robyn cries but nothing changes. The moments where accountability is mentioned but never practiced. Those moments reveal the truth. This system didn't just fail romantically. It failed ethically. Polygamy didn't collapse because the women were jealous or petty or cruel. It collapsed because it concentrated power in one person who couldn't wield it responsibly. And when that power was questioned, instead of adapting, it punished dissent. That's not a marriage model. That's a cautionary tale. And the audience knows it now. That's why the reactions online are sharper, less forgiving, more analytical. People aren't asking who's right anymore. They're asking why was this allowed to go on for so long? They're asking why submission was spiritualized. why obedience was rewarded, why women were expected to endure while one man's comfort remained central, and most importantly, they're asking what happens next. Because this story isn't over just because the marriages ended. The consequences are still unfolding. The children are watching. The audience is watching. And the silence left behind by the women who walked away is louder than anything Kody can say. What happens when there's no one left to blame? What happens when loyalty no longer buys protection? What happens when the system finally turns inward? That's the question hanging in the air now. And the answer is coming whether anyone is ready for it or not. There's a point in every long-running illusion where silence becomes the loudest indictment. No shouting, no confrontation, just the absence of people who used to stay and explain and justify and hope. That's where this story lands. Not with chaos, but with exposure. Because when the women left, they didn't just exit relationships. They withdrew consent from the narrative that had protected Kody Brown for decades. And without that consent, the story he told about himself stopped working. What's left now is not a misunderstood patriarch or a wounded husband. What's left is a man sitting inside the consequences of his own rules. Rules he created. Rules he enforced. Rules he refused to bend. Kody wanted obedience, not partnership. He wanted loyalty without accountability. He wanted women who would orbit him without ever becoming gravitational forces themselves. And for a long time, the system worked because the cost of leaving felt higher than the cost of staying. Until it didn't. And once the mental shift happens, once a woman realizes that peace is worth more than approval, everything changes. That's why Christine didn't crumble after she left. That's why Janelle didn't beg to stay. That's why Meri, after years of humiliation, finally stopped performing devotion for a man who had already emotionally divorced her. Their exits weren't impulsive. They were overdue. And that's the part Kody still can't process. Because in his mind, love is proven by endurance. If you stay, you love him. If you leave, you never did. That binary allows him to avoid the most dangerous conclusion of all, that someone can love you and still choose themselves. That truth destroys control. And Robyn, intentionally or not, remains the last pillar holding that old belief upright. Her submission, her loyalty, her constant reframing of his behavior as misunderstood rather than harmful, it all preserves the fantasy that the system itself wasn't flawed. Just the people who couldn't survive it. But history doesn't work that way. When multiple people exit the same structure with the same wounds, the structure is the problem. When every dissenting voice is labeled disloyal, the leader is the problem. When obedience is praised more than honesty, the collapse is inevitable. And it already happened. The family didn't break because of jokes, girl games, or bitterness. It broke because power was hoarded instead of shared. Because emotional labor was expected but never reciprocated. Because one man's comfort mattered more than everyone else's dignity. That's not marriage. That's not faith. That's not love. That's control wearing a religious costume. And the audience sees it now. That's why reactions have shifted from sympathy to scrutiny, from confusion to clarity, from this is sad to this was avoidable. People aren't just watching the show anymore, they're dissecting it. They're pulling receipts. They're connecting patterns. They're asking why submission was glorified while autonomy was punished. And they're asking the question Kody never prepared for. If Robyn is the reward for obedience, what does that make everyone else? That question lingers because it has no comfortable answer. Robyn didn't win a prize. She inherited the system, a system that consumes women quietly, slowly, under the promise of protection. A system that requires constant validation to survive. A system that isolates instead of nurtures. And now, with no contrast left, no wives to blame, no exits to demonize, the system turns inward. That's the final stage. Because control needs resistance to feel powerful. Without it, it becomes hollow. And hollow power collapses under its own weight. So this isn't just the end of a family. It's the end of a myth, the myth that submission is virtue, that silence is strength, that obedience equals love. The women who left proved otherwise simply by living better lives once they were gone. And that truth is irreversible. You can't unsee it. You can't reframe it. You can't cry your way out of it. The audience knows now what was really happening behind the language, behind the loyalty speeches, behind the tears. And once the spell breaks, it never works again. This wasn't about shy or pretty. It wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about girl games. It was about power. And the moment that power was questioned, everything fell apart. Now I want to know what you think. Do you see submission or manipulation? Do you see loyalty or survival strategy? Do you think the system could ever have worked? Or was it always destined to collapse? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this breakdown resonated with you, hit like, subscribe for more deep dive commentary, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story may be over on screen, but the conversation is just getting started.